due to how those ecologies limit legitimate status attainment in men, while at the same time raising their testosterone levels because these ecologies are more competitive.
Hey, they also attempt to raise one's testosterone to create chaos by using the methods that you're seeing on your screen here. This is like a gamified approach to organized harassment. For instance, when a person comes home, make car horns and car alarm sounds. Second, make it rain after stressful situation or revelation. Third, stop rain, then start sonic conditioning and ambient surveillance. Fourth, make loud or quiet depending on response, use community assets. And fifth, use directed energy weapon EMF for voice to skull to facilitate individualized behavior modification.
When men can't raise their status in legally, socially acceptable ways, then criminal ways become more attractive.
I gotta disagree, Professor. In 2025, one just needs autonomy in this space to grow. Especially if it's from the digital space, there's so many potential opportunities out there that allow one to be successful and get whatever it is that comes with success without risking their freedom. We have the examples with guys that are just coming home after doing football numbers in prison based off of them doing what they did during the crack era. We got that, we got the mafia movies, and we have the quotables from people that we respect in hip hop. We know how the story ends when it comes to living the street life. So that's not really a viable option in this day and age. And I would say that by and large, like, young folks understand this. You see, it only had to happen with one generation, and we've grown past it. Per usual, again, another encumbrance or hindrance placed on the path just to sort of keep the status quo in place. Now, the system isn't built for this. I suspect they thought they'd have us for at least a couple generations down the line until we realized that it was a losing battle. But that collective enlightenment happened, or is happening, when, say, someone like Vlad TV, for example, does an interview with a kingpin that came home after doing 37 years. You know, the kids get to watch this and say, well, maybe I shouldn't take that path. Now, what I'm seeing at the grassroots level appears to be white supremacy's existential fight to control the ability to allow black men to raise their social status in legally, socially acceptable ways by way of using all the tools that they've used historically, and along with the media's insistence on telling you that the way that caused that kingpin who served 37 years in prison is still a viable option, and you can continue to pursue it to try to get the accoutrements from being successful. The good news is that it's even more comical when you see it these days. The bad news is that it would appear that the overseer roles, the gatekeepers, if you will, are being incentivized to keep the status quo in place by continuing to feed that destructive and clearly absurd message to the masses. And the white supremacists have also weaponized access and power to recruit women that love power more than men, for example, to hold the whip and be the carrot that can modify behavior.
And this comment here is from America, from this book called The Uptown Kids, Struggle and Hope, in the projects in 1994. And when we break this down from an evolutionary point of view, it's just a perfect fit. So these are comments from a small-time Harlem drug dealer. In order for us to get respect, so from an evolutionary perspective, that is a social resource. Respect is a social resource. Explain to sometime Harlem drug dealer, we got to put a posse together, make some money. Once this happens, watch the hoes flock to us. So they get the money, their status increases, and their attractiveness increases, and now they can attract more women. So we go out and risk getting killed. So now they're increasing the level of risk-taking. They can survive just fine. They don't need to take the risks. But if they don't take the risks, now they feel they can't raise in rank and attract, females. So they're getting involved. So we go out and risk getting killed so we could be with them girls. So for the reproductive behavior, for all that to happen, they have to engage in mate competition. And to do that, they have to raise their relative rank in relation to the other young males out there. So all of this breaks down nice and tightly, from an evolutionary perspective with exactly what we'd expect, why they're engaging in this behavior. If they can't go the legitimate legal ways, then there's pressure to go this way. And at the bottom of the inequality, pit, there's a higher level of this kind of behavior down there for exactly what this Harlem drug dealer has said.
And again, the white supremacists know this very well, but it definitely has to be updated for 2025 because of the aforementioned.
As you can see there, to attract women, men must raise their status, and when they can't do it legally, risk-taking and criminal activity will escalate amongst some percentage of that male population.
And again, Professor, the system in the United States, the prison industrial complex, is literally banking on, waiting for those black men to make their way down to the revolving door. A quick overview of some of the financial instruments and what they're connected to in terms of industries in America aligned with the prison industrial complex will show you what I mean.
At this point, violence from police seems warranted, so the general population will go along with police violence as long as it is in these discriminatory ecologies directed at minimizing the black male threat.
It would appear that I'm the case study down here in South Florida, unbeknownst to me.
Now, if you think this is just stuff that's in scientific journals sitting around there, but in the real world, there's no clear evidence of this.
In due time.
I actually have a very strong example that I clipped from the lecture I gave on discriminatory ecologies. It's not on black people. It's actually on Chinese Americans.
So in the Chinatowns of the 19th and early 20th century, they had what you see there, 3-4 times the rates of homicide, prostitution, drug use, addiction, gang violence, drug trafficking, high mortality rate, just all kinds of bad outcomes, and a lot of bad outcomes that we talk about today in some of the bad neighborhoods, let's say like in Chicago or Baltimore and some areas of England as well. And this was the way they were stereotyped by the socially dominant group in America at the time as depraved colonies of prostitutes. They're gamblers, they're violent, drug addicts, and they got no decency, all this negative social norm, ethnic stereotyping, you call it.
Now, here's what's interesting when you think about America. The same perspective that the white folks had as it relates to the folks that were living in that area at that time is the motivating factor for black conservatives. They like to use the moral decay angle to try to, make friendly with the white supremacists. And that's really the only option that they have under the system of white supremacy. Is either you make friendly or you go against their ideology, like the liberal folks. But I suspect this is going to turn into something that proves that maybe it's all by design, and whatever group gets relegated to that section, that place, will have the same outcome regardless of the intervention.
Now, one of the things that they were doing to them caused a massive sex ratio imbalance in the Chinese American population. So they first started coming to America in like the 1850s. So you see 20,000 Chinese laborers arrived, but only 50 were Chinese women.
Say what? See, that's that cruel, hating spirit I be talking about, yo. Again, out of 20,000 Chinese laborers, 50 of them were Chinese women. Let's continue.
And of course, the Americans made laws that Chinese men can't touch the white women. So there's only 50 Chinese American women there, and you can't mess with the white women either. And then they restricted Chinese female immigration with laws because they were saying it's to prevent prostitution. And I'm sure there was plenty of white prostitutes around, and they weren't restricting white women coming to America. So that's not really a good excuse.
I gotta interject. I guess I'm witnessing a historical moment here, just being able to put it all together. We have a great case study to review how cruel these folks really are, yo. Because if they did that to those dudes back then, as far as, again, being like, nah, you can't touch our women, one side of the political aisle comes in with the whole prostitution thing and presenting that as bad, shaming you for what the other side is literally doing on purpose. Because remember, there are only 50 of your women around. And of course, they gotta have first dibs on that. You dig? So as a dude that's on the grind, trying to move up that economic ladder, the most fiscally responsible thing to do is jerk off. But yeah, yo, what they did to them Chinese folks back then, they still doing it today. And look at Miami, Florida. I don't think I'm the only one, but I'm the one that's speaking truth to power based off what I've seen. And yo, my name is H. Vanderbilt Alexander. So this is a historical asterisk here.
And then they had the Chinese Exclusion Act, where they just tried to bar Chinese competition by barring Chinese from entering the country illegally. But of course, the men continue to come in illegally. This imbalanced sex ratio does very bad things behaviorally to any population that experiences it, regardless of what direction it's in. Now, for this group, it was in the direction of a high sex ratio, which means there's a whole lot of men, very few women. And this causes bad behavior in men. It increases social competition amongst males to get what attracts a female. And what attracts a female tends to be the status of the male.
What's happening in South Florida is this recalibration of what makes a male appealing. Sure, on one hand, status exists and will always be valued by a certain segment of the female population. The only difference is that I believe now it's pretty much agreed upon that the male status will be a stepping stone for the female into the relationship and beyond. This is simply the price of entry, okay? Put that aside. But on the other hand, you have this astroturf movement that largely consists of folks that really are in the out groups attempting to get access into the in groups, being funded or platformed, if you will, for their usefulness as it relates to maintaining the status quo. It's the state's narrative control mechanism when it comes to popular culture, aka hip-hop culture, aka black culture. What we're witnessing is this transition from analog to digital, and it has to happen in various ways, including conversation, community, narrative. But instead of it being a scenario in which the cream rises to the top, what America embodies, here we have a scenario where they've gotten out front to force men to learn a trade, become a police officer, a firefighter, a correctional officer. To be clear, I respect all of those positions and jobs. But when we're in a scenario where you can become an influencer, or at least attempt to try to do that while maintaining these jobs, right? The system is attempting to organize itself by, again, putting folks either in category A or B. And if you're in the out group, you're definitely getting a kick in the rear end, especially as a male, a black male, to be told, hey, know your role and stay in your place, right? Which is, again, the footstool for society. Your innovative ideas and concepts be damned. Screw all of that. Get in line. This is being said while the women are allowed to continue to flood OnlyFans, rack up degrees, possibly become single mothers. The state will protect you there, of course. Divest from black men, continue to gaslight, and then position yourselves as the bona fide leaders of the black community. So to connect it back to the Chinese experience that the professor was talking about, it's almost as if you can sort of map out how they want to keep you as slaves and have everything for themselves, as they did with the Chinese dudes. The only difference is that in 2025, they're using security theater staging reality as one of the fun, believe it or not, ways to maintain order. Go figure. The majority of black males that haven't opted to become passport bros because they can't due to child support have to play along, go along with the game, even though everything points to a reality in which your sons will end up being slaves in such a dope, wide open world you can't even fathom, yo. Imagine that, the prospects of that. But nah, I get passionate about this part because, yo, look at all the work I put in to all this stuff that I created, man. That's just scratching the surface, yo. But I just can't believe that, yo, when you get to this point, you realize that literally the system has something in place to stop you from advancing beyond just having ideas. That'll be some straight up BS, yo.
So if you see here in 1890, the ratio of Chinese American men to Chinese American women, 27-1. Even in the 1920s, it was 7-1. And you could find, let's say, a Chinese female living in a house, basically acting as a wife to 4, 5, 6, 8 men at the same time. And of course, this was terrible for the Chinese American females. Their very high mortality rates. They didn't last long. For them to live 10 years was a stretch. You know, there was a lot of disease and so on. It was just really bad for this community. Now, in the 1940s, America became an ally to China. So you can't have these racist laws against Chinese people when China is now your geopolitical ally to help you fight Japan. So they had to take the laws back and start treating Chinese people a little better. So immediately, a whole lot of immigration from China was female. So they got all these bad behaving Chinese American males wifed up. They calmed down, stopped all the fighting and all the gang violence and all that stuff because you don't have the need for this increased social competition because now you're bringing balance to your sex ratio. So there's no reason to behave that way. And when men get married, their testosterone level goes down. They put more effort into looking after their wife and children. They're not out there competing for women anymore. So the behavior, because they were being restricted employment-wise as well, along with these laws. And so it created this really bad ecological environment. But once they changed the laws, all of that started to calm down now.
I guess the question at that point becomes whether you just forgive and forget as far as the ecological environment, or do you really pay attention and say, hey, never again? Because if it wasn't for attaining model minority status for the Chinese, could that situation have taken place again in which you have 20,000 men with 50 of your women?
So in the mid-20th century is when the gang violence and the gambling and all this bad stuff that was going on, violent, socially competitive behavior declined as the gender ratio found balance. So this was a change in their ecological conditions, change for the better. The behavior of all the young men improved for the better because the gender balance took care of all the bad stuff they were behaving that way for in the first place. But we should note that this ecology was created by racial discrimination. All the laws and the personal psychologies that we were dealing with from white people, all the racism they were dealing with, created this terrible environment for Chinese Americans. And once they changed all the laws and basically took that foot off of the Chinese Americans' neck, they said, all right, we're going to show you white boys what we could do. When you turn off the racism, we can actually outcompete you in your own country.
That's a fact. The only thing that's stopping that is the gatekeeping. They don't want to see no real competition. Straight up. They rather keep rigging the game and then apologizing afterwards.
So now they are one of the highest performing ethnic groups in the United States. Now, what I kind of wanted us to pick up from this is that we have to be very careful in understanding where some of our behavior problems and difficulties and dysfunction within our community comes from. Because imagine if I said, what's wrong with those Chinese guys? Why are they killing each other all the time? You know, they're probably coming from one-parent families. They don't have the right values. There's bad culture there. If we fix the culture, then we can get these Chinese guys to behave better.
but there wasn't anything wrong with their culture. There was something wrong with the ecological circumstances they were in, evoking that kind of behavior out of them.
That one there is for the conservative black grifters that have been using that as a talking point. Stop it. Both of them out of pocket. Both sides out of pocket, really. You heard what the professor said. At various points, both sides of the political aisle are in agreement as to there having to be sacrificial lambs, if you will. And again, those could be your sons, brothers, father, grandfather, uncles. You never know.
Because they turned this around in basically a generation and a half. There was no cultural change, but there was massive ecological change.
That's a fact. Check out this video here by @TyBuggy Podcast. That's TYBUGGY Podcast. Street culture is lame. Gen Z killed street culture with logic. So again, the streets are saying we're at that point of enlightenment.
So they were group A. The ecology created for them by white supremacy caused this kind of behavior out of Chinese Americans for like 80 years. And of course, this reduces their competitiveness. They couldn't compete with white Americans due to what white Americans were doing with this ecology that they created for them, evoking higher levels of this kind of behavior out of them. Once they got out of that deprived environment and much more of their population into a stable environment, this is now what they are. Less risk-taking, less gang violence and all these other bad outcomes, and much more of a higher level of performance. And again, note, no cultural change, ecological change.
Insert pictures of black conservative influencers that trick white conservatives by talking about there needs to be a change in black culture.
And they could use their culture now to perform at a very, very high level.
So as I said before, hip hop culture is popular culture, is black culture, or one aspect of black culture. But if we got that on deck and that's firmly established, clearly it stands to reason as to why you would hate on a group that has the world's attention when it comes to something that you thought was just going to be a fad. And even your kids are into this thing that's called hip hop. Now imagine once black folks and black males in particular start adding on the intellectual elements within the culture. That right there is a formidable competitor. No?
With white racism on, look at what we saw from Chinese Americans. White racism off, high rates of educational attainment, household income, high status jobs, low crime rates, high rates of marriage, and so forth. Two different ecologies, same culture. That is a whole lot we could say about what you just watched.
Indeed.
Can you see the evolutionary logic of why the Chinese needed to be held down by the dominant group? Because look at what happened at the end. When American society stopped strongly selecting against them, meaning when white America took the foot off their neck, Chinese Americans went to work and decided to show white America what they could do when the shackles come off.
White supremacy, since it's very sophisticated and is a team sport, understands this evolutionary logic. So what it has done is gone ahead in front of the inevitability, especially if we're looking at the Chinese example, to place complex traps that'll keep black men in the same place as it relates to their evolutionary ecology.
They are now a top competitor. That was the evolutionary logic of holding them down in the first place. You know, in Jim Sedanis's book, he talks about group-based social dominance hierarchies. Groups at the top of the hierarchy want to remain top. So they carry out all these cost-inflicting strategies to hold down the groups below them.
Hammer hits the nail on the head. And as I stated before, you won't believe what some of these cost-inflicting strategies are at the grassroots level.
And that's exactly what was being done to the Chinese. Now, because China became an ally to the United States in World War II, those harsh, oppressive, racist laws that were being applied to Chinese Americans, they were removed.
Black Americans have been attempting to be an ally to this country in spite of everything, yo.
And you saw what happened. You saw how well Chinese Americans performed. Now they're one of the top performing ethnic groups in the country.
See, my worldview is holistic. So when I think about the race towards AGI and automation and some variation of the social credit score, I think it's important for the U.S. to get all its people on point so that we can compete on an international level. This will help us to get closer to becoming a Kardashev scale type 1 civilization.
So to prevent this race from competing successfully with white people, that's the evolutionary logic of treating them like that, the way they did for those 70, 80 years. So as you saw there, Chinese Americans got the male out-group threat treatment. The level of status restriction caused them to raise their level of risk-taking and violent criminality in an effort to defend what little status and respect they had and possibly gain a little more respect.
This is where the self-cleaning oven concept really thrives. And I'll explain this either on Pre-Crime Institute or Hip Hop Legal. But this is a strategy that was used by the LAPD, for instance, to use the same dynamics that the professor was speaking about to gaslight individuals within the community to take out one another for status.
That is what inequality often does to men. If you have a pinch of status and respect left, you will fight like a junkyard dog to hold on to the little bit of status and respect that you have. This is why in those desperate ecologies, you see low status men so quick to engage in violent social competitive behavior. Because women don't choose men who don't have respect, who don't have a little bit of status. So what little scraps of it you got, you fight to keep it, maybe even get more, willing to take all kinds of risks to get more. That's why the criminality is higher in those ecologies. That example, it's something to keep in mind when trying to understand high levels of violent social competition that takes place between young black men. Let's say in places like Chicago and Baltimore. You should be looking at those ecologies significantly different now based on this information, and you can go and read up a bit more on it. The paper on discriminatory ecologies will be in the description.
Note to self, read the paper on discriminatory ecology that the professor mentioned.
So you can read that for yourself and then take a look at some of these ecologies where you are in your country and see if that's what's taking place.
Now, in America, they talk about Chicago a lot because there's a lot of gun violence and homicide is really high in Chicago. So if I see this stat, you don't need to show me where the violence is. I know it's right there, blacks in poverty, 81%, because that's where they're experiencing the really bad end of inequality. And I can know that whites not in poverty, there's not a lot of violence going on there because they're at a much higher level. The level of competitiveness there is going to be a lot less intense. Just track the inequality, and that's where you can track the violence.
Wonderful. So now we have a plan that can help us understand the grand Chicago experiment on black people, black males in particular.
So homicide rates go up and down because of the intensity of local competition, which is heavily influenced by inequality. Now, the question is, why does inequality cause men to behave this way? Well, men want to attract women. What are women's preferences? So in lots of research, and not just, in the West, but cross-cultural research, social position, the rank of the male plays a role in how attractive a female will find a man. So for men, we're talking about sexual selection theory for men and women, but traits in a mate that women like, what really attracts them to a man? Well, a man's going to want those traits. And of course, they have to compete amongst each other to prove that, they have those traits to a higher degree.
So if you're a student of history and you know this, what's the next logical step from a competition standpoint? Well, you attempt to control the access to the females. Talk about weak and spineless.
Evolution designed us to resist inequality because inequality represents what we would call a fitness differential. So this is an unequal ability for health and survival, and certainly in mate competition. When you don't have much, you attract less. When you have a lot, you can attract a lot more. So we are kind of built to go ahead and erase that difference, that inequality, as a function of sexual selection. If you improve your social ranking, you improve your ability to attract others, and this then improves your ability, to do all those good things that we want right there. Survival, mate competition, reproduction, just living well, all of that is an inequality, but you can be at the top of it doing really, really well if you've erased that inequality, and if you're at the bottom of it, you're struggling. So we try to erase this inequality, and that is not always going to be nonviolence.
And so we've arrived at the inflection point. I gotta tell you, I've covered this in all kinds of ways. And if evolution designed us to be this way, what does it say when you don't react off of that primal instinct? This is, by the way, where I think another vile element of the system exists. It's the groups that now try to demonize you because they can't have you coming off as some kind of angel or Messiah-like figure. You dig? So what do? Pile on. Continue to pile on. Act like they don't hear you while allowing the gaslighting to take place. Allow you to continue to fail and really test if you're serious about what you're saying. Because make no mistake about it, there's no change that's going to take place if it's up to them. In fact, they'll either attempt to cause your demise expeditiously or run a slow burn campaign to destroy you.
So some of us are going to try to erase that gap violently.
The violence in Chicago may look a little different now.
Understood. Thanks, Professor. Hey, listen, look at how the algorithm aligns perfectly. Now we have a way to sort of make sense of Chicago, and we have the death of T.H.F. Bezu that took place literally a day ago or 2 days ago. But, we all about solutions, irrespective of the hating, of the pettiness. We gonna make sense of it academically, and then everything else should fall into place. But if not, it is what it is. We had the experience. We have the experience so that history can view it. FWM. My name is H. Vanderbilt Alexander. I'm from Miami, Florida, and this is the Loser Simulation. Gia!